Okay, so we are live now, and we just need to invite Paige over. Work relatively straightforward. Hey, I've just sent you the invitation, so hopefully you can see it and works on the first go. Because Instagram has been having a few moments recently. So hi Mike, how are you? So okay, cool. Let's see. Accept, go live. And fingers crossed, it should work out pretty fast and well. So I'm just gonna this machine will test us. Is it coming with anything on your end, Paige? Because it keeps on telling me that you cannot join for whatever reason. We've had this problem with some live streams before. The app has been a bit glitchy. So I don't know what it's coming on your end, but let me know. And then we can hopefully get started. So, right, it's completely taking you out. So apologies for this, guys. As some of you may know, Instagram has been an absolute pain for the last few weeks, just trying to get any live streams gone on the first go. So we're just waiting for Paige to hopefully join the stream so we can talk about travel journalism and travel writing for all of you. And hopefully this will work out smoothly, she says. She hopes. So I keep on accepting your request Paige, but it keeps on giving me some kind of problem saying you were not able to join. Yeah, and I keep on accepting it, and it just says that you can't join, and then it takes the request away. So I don't know if I'll send you a new invitation, but every time I send it, it just says that you are not. It doesn't like it essentially. Just to check, are you joining from your phone rather than like a computer or something like that? Because it has problems with devices that aren't phones normally. But it sends you the invitation. I keep on accepting yours. It just keeps on saying that, unable to join. So sometimes when we restart the stream, it works, but it's entirely dependent on random chance. I have just updated my phone and everything before I started because that normally helps. So let me know if you want to do that, and we can always just quickly restart it otherwise. And go live. Yep. It's not liking it. It really, really, really isn't.
Oh, hello! We made it.
There you go. Finally.
All right. Sorry for the trouble. I have no idea what's
You're
going on
fine.
there.
It's honestly, it's the app itself. It's honestly just such a pain. Can I just confirm? Could you guys say in the chat if you can see us and hear us all fine? If you can just give us a thumbs up, that would be great. Can you hear me all good and see me all good as well, Paige?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Yeah. That's fine. It's just it went very, very silent for a second, and I was like, "No, please don't destroy the stream now." Hi, Daddy Drinker Beer. Thank you so much for letting us know that you can see us and hear us. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sophia. We're excited too. So, without any further ado, let me very quickly tell us what this is all about, and then we'll move on to Paige and what she's here for. So my name is Lillian. I am the CEO of Travolution Tours, which is a company that advocates for sustainability, accessibility, and affordability. And this is part of the series that we call the Hist Club, which is literally getting people to understand more about the different aspects of history, culture, and tourism from all kinds of spectrums in life, whether it's from historians, archaeologists, sociologists, and journalists, to really, understand this subject matter. And today, Paige is here to tell us about her experiences as a travel writer and journalist, and a few bits and bobs that she has had to encounter along the way, right, Paige? So if I could just pass the floor over to you, Paige, to introduce yourself in case someone watching this now or later may not know you, please do the honors.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Lillian, for inviting me to speak with you. And thank you to everyone joining. So yes, I'm Paige McClanahan. I'm an American travel journalist, although I've lived outside the United States for most of my adult life. I left the US in 2008 and have lived in 5 countries on 2 continents since then. But for the last, so bouncing around a bit, but for the last 5 years, I've been living in France, and for the last few months, I've been living in Paris. So that's where I am today. And I'm a freelance journalist. I write regularly for the travel section of the New York Times, which is my most regular outlet. I've also written, or am in the process of finishing writing, a book on tourism, which will appear in June in the United States. So I'm excited about that.
Awesome. So hopefully that clarifies to everybody what you're doing and where you are right now. And I guess that segues pretty well into our first question. So Paige, can you explain to me and everyone else, why did you decide to become a travel journalist? Like, how does one reach this conclusion? This is what I want to do with my life. And how do you get into this very specific niche? Because, I appreciate journalism is not always the most straightforward career. So yeah, how did you find that, and why did you decide to pick on this route?
Oh, well, thank you for that question. And yeah, I have to say, I kind of stepped into it backwards almost, but I should say, like, from a very early age, I've really had 2 passions. One is writing, like writing for a public audience, and the second is just exploring the world, like exploring the world around me however I can. And it wasn't until kind of my mid-20s that those 2 passions kind of began to merge, and I sort of started to make a career out of them. So I started writing for a public audience, but first I was writing about economics and trade and multilateral negotiations, and that's when I was in Geneva. So nothing to do with travel, although travel had always been part of my and then I moved to Sierra Leone. I moved to West Africa in 2010.
Right.
Yeah, my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, got a job with the United Nations in Freetown. And so it was from there that I started freelancing and looking for all sorts of opportunities to write about this fascinating world that I was experiencing and getting to know, and that was so different for me and what I had experienced in my life so far. And as a writer looking to write, contribute as a freelancer, there are only so many sections of kind of papers and magazines that you can contribute to as a freelancer, and travel is one of them. And so from Sierra Leone, which is kind of an unlikely tourist destination, I started pitching travel stories. And my first travel writing gig was updating the one guidebook that existed to Sierra Leone, like a dedicated guidebook just to Sierra Leone. I prepared the second edition of that. This was back in 2010, 2011. So I had a kind of a classic guidebook updating job. At the same time, I was writing for outlets in the US and the UK about economic issues and sustainable development issues in West Africa. I was reporting on kind of conflicts that were happening next door in Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire. So kind of like for a while, I saw travel writing as sort of like a fun supplement to my more serious, let's say, journalism about economics and kind of political and social issues. Right. But then we moved, after sort of lots of bouncing around, we ended up landing in France, which is when I started contributing to the New York Times. And we were living for 5 years in a little village in the French Alps where tourism is really the lifeblood of the local economy. And it was really living there and seeing tourism in all of its sort of complications and all of its nuances that really inspired me to want to take this up as a sort of a focus of my journalism, because I had, written about all of these sort of like more serious issues, and I wanted to take that lens and put it on travel and tourism, which is something that I kind of saw a gap there. I saw a lot of, the media tended to be either sort of like, travel stories tended to be either kind of really like top 10 beaches in Brazil, or, over tourism destroys the world sort of thing. And I thought there was an opportunity for somebody to write something that's more nuanced and more engaged and more kind of analytical. And so those are the stories that I started to pitch, and those are the stories that they started to assign me to write. But it really came out of seeing the importance of tourism to the community in which I had become, a resident, and which I saw tourism really doing a lot of good and causing complications too. So yeah, for the last 5.5 years now, tourism has been the focus of my work, and I find it fascinating and full of gray areas, full of nuance, which makes it sort of endlessly interesting for me.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And thank you for sharing your journey, because I think a lot of people don't realize how these things happen. I think a lot of people think that it's kind of like a very bohemian life of, oh, I just go places and write about it. And it's not necessarily, how that happens. And from that point of view, I also wanted to ask you, now that you've been doing not just specifically travel journalism, but overall through your career, do you think what you do overall is a very romanticized kind of job? As in, I kind of think of the meme expectations versus reality.
Yeah.
And particularly in the world of tourism and traveling of any kind, there is always like massive shocks, differences, etc., etc. So how do you feel that kind of romanticism has affected your career or your day-to-day job in that sense?
Well, I have to say, first, it sort of, was one of the things that inspired me to join it, because I was one of the romanticizing people. And it's fantastic. I mean, I do pinch myself, honestly, that I get to fly places for the New York Times to write about them. So that it is fantastic. I have to say, like, the whole guidebook writing thing left me feeling a little bit like, it's very tedious. So that I've only had one guidebook writing gig, that first one in Sierra Leone. Fantastic excuse to go to absolutely every single corner of the country, and go to every restaurant, every hotel. And in a place like Sierra Leone, where the infrastructure, at least at that point, this is sort of post-Civil War, pre-Ebola, 2010 to 2012, I was down there. It was, the infrastructure was really, let's say, kind of, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure, especially outside the capital. So traveling around was rough, but a good challenge, and a fun thing to do, but maybe not as romantic an assignment as somebody might imagine. But yeah, I mean, but the work that I do now, I spend a lot of time on the phone with people. A lot of this, some of the stories I write. I'm working on a story now that I'm for the New York Times. I'm not traveling for, but I'll interview 20 people.
Wow.
And maybe half of those people not even half of those people will end up in the story, right? So it takes a huge amount of work to, my job, as I see it, is to do my best to understand the whole like breadth of the truth of the whatever event or situation that's happening, that I'm reporting on. So to do that, I really have to do my homework and speak to a lot of people, and ideally see it on the ground, usually see it on the ground. So it takes a lot of work, and of course the pay isn't as much as you might hope. But I mean, it is a pretty cool gig. I got to say, I still do pinch myself that I get to travel places, and I have such a wonderful excuse to ask fascinating people really nosy questions, and learn about all sorts of things as part of my job. So yeah, I feel really lucky.
No, that's great, and I'm glad that you yourself can see the lines and the way things get blurred. I think we had a similar conversation a few weeks back in Spanish with a colleague, Raquel, who is a journalist in Spain, but she does sort of investigation journalism, specifically in Arab countries. And I think from a similar perspective, she also encountered, similar issues that you've suggested here. So now, hopefully, both our Spanish and English audience will have a better idea about what it takes. Um, the other thing that I wanted to ask you was about the things that you get to do. What do you think is the coolest or the craziest thing you've ever had to do for work? Because I appreciate it's a lot of spending time with people, collecting that information, etc., etc. But I suspect at some point you may have been in like an outrageous situation of, wow, how did this end up happening? Either for completely bonkers or absolutely awesome. So do you have a story like that, or maybe several?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, I mean, because as a journalist, one thing that I really try to do is to kind of immerse myself in the thing that I'm reporting on so that I can understand it fully. And I have to say, some of maybe I can think of several things, but some of the most exciting things, maybe, or interesting, unexpected things, have come through the reporting that I did for the book that I've
Mhm.
been writing. And so I went to, like, the first thing that comes to mind happened just this summer. I was in Amsterdam because, like, one
Right.
chapter, I write a lot about Amsterdam, and there's a big kind of controversy over sex tourism there.
Mhm.
Has proposed moving sex workers out of the red light district, and she's, proposed banning the sale of cannabis to non-Dutch residents and this kind of thing. So I wanted to go and really get a sense of it. So I'm hanging out in Amsterdam. I got to spend a lot of time with sex workers, and as part of my research, I went to see a sex show, which is not something that I would do normally.
Mhm.
But I was like, I wanted to see, this is like, it's part of the economy and it's part of the culture of tourism in this place. I wanted to get a sense, and I actually described this scene in the book. I wanted to get a sense of what the vibe is like in one of these places and what the sort of the working conditions are for these women, and they were only women who I saw working. And so yeah, I went to a sex show in Amsterdam. I also got to hang out with the guy who drills the cave in the glacier in Chamonix that tourists can visit. So a
Mhm.
book looks at kind of last chance tourism and climate change. And there's an ice cave inside the Mer de Glace glacier, which is just outside of Chamonix, which will no longer exist. I mean, probably 10 years from now, certainly 12, 15 years from now, we won't be able to go inside this glacier. But since the 40s, tourists to Chamonix have been able to walk inside a man-made ice cave that is carved inside the glacier. And so there's this guy, he's a 29-year-old guy who has a company that drills the cave in the glacier every year. And this company was started by his grandfather, then it was passed to his dad, and now he's doing it. And so I got to hang out with him and like literally hang on to the side of this like massive ice drilling machine.
Wow.
It's like a backhoe with an ice pick on it, and hang out and like clean the side of the machine while he was like rattling through the glacier. So that was last January. So that was pretty cool. I mean, then maybe one last thing I'll say. I've gone paragliding twice for work.
Wow.
Yeah, I profiled the guy who invented paragliding. Well, there's a little bit, different people have different stories, but
Sure.
some people at NASA were doing it back in the 60s, but this is the guy who really sort of started, popularized it.
Mhm.
And he's a French guy and he's now 70, but several decades ago, was it 1979 or 1980? I forget. It's been a few years since I did this story. He was training for the French like parachuting championships, and he didn't have enough money to pay for the gas to take a plane up. So he took his like parachuting chute and like went up the side of a local mountain and jumped off of it. And so
Fair.
paragliding is a sport. So he took me. So I with him, so I found out about this guy and that he lived not far from us in our little village in the mountains. And I asked him, like, hey, like, I want to write a profile about you for an American magazine. Can I go paragliding with you? And he took me paragliding. We jumped off the exact same spot where he jumped, I think it was 1979 or 80. I'd have to check the exact date. And we had, a flight together. And he was like pointing out, this is where we landed.
Wow.
And, this guy's in his 70s now. And he still runs a paragliding school. So that was fun, and then I went paragliding in Verbier. I have a little like journalistic niche of profiling paragliders, and I profiled the then reigning women's world champion paraglider, which was pretty cool. She's
Whoa.
Swiss. She's from Verbier, and I drove out to Verbier, and we went paragliding together. And I wrote about her for a Far magazine in the U.S. So that was pretty cool. So, but yeah, what like a sex show, like drilling a hole in a glacier, and paragliding. Those are my three. Like,
I mean, it's a
and
very
there's
interesting.
a lot of Zoom calls happen in between all of those kinds of things too.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, I hope people don't think you just kind of turn up and it just happened. There is a lot of preparation that goes into that. But from you saying this, I think it also goes to show how varied like your job can be and sort of unexpected in some ways. Because I feel a lot of people think that it's just the same drill over and over. But just because there is a proven method to do things, it doesn't mean that, the situations that you can find yourself in are sometimes a bit unreal, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word. Um, but it sounds like some days you just don't know what you're gonna have to deal with, right?
Well, I mean, I should say like all of these stories were ideas that I had that I pitched. I mean, the book stuff were like ideas that I had that I just like decided, okay, I want that to be in the book. And, my book editor wasn't there to say no. So, and, but then the stories, like the paragliding stories, I had pitched those to editors. But like all of these were, it's sort of like, what are the limits of the things that I could do for my job? Or like, what are the limits
Yeah.
of my education? Like, and my ability to pitch those ideas to editors who will pay me to write about those things. So, if you can dream it, you can do it, right? So these are, I don't know, it's a good, good motivation for me to think outside the box and try to figure out a way to, to write about things that I find fascinating or important or, they really.
Sure. Yeah. No, I completely get that. Um, on on that front, just because I'm keeping an eye on the time, um, I think in comparison to what you've just said, I suspect that maybe sometimes writing these stories or like you just said, pitching these ideas to editors and trying to get it all to happen. I appreciate journalism has some very serious challenges and some obstacles that you may have to overcome on your, journey. So can you tell us a bit more about those kind of challenges or perhaps some of the hardest situations that you found yourself while trying to sort out any of your travel story?
Yeah, certainly. I think, I mean, for like a lot of people would have experienced this, but from a really practical perspective, like kind of breaking in can be really hard to do. And, even now, like, I have a lot of stories under my belt, but starting a relationship with a new editor can be a challenge. You just have to sort of pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch. And then luckily, once you get a good relationship with an editor or a few editors, then, the work becomes a lot easier. So that's just kind of from a practical perspective. In terms of actually, doing the work and writing the stories, like, once you kind of have the assignment, I'd say, this is the challenge that any journalist would face, but maybe it's especially challenging in the world of travel, is just making sure that you are, you're telling the truth and you're not telling the spin. You're not sort of rehashing a story that somebody wants you to, that somebody with a sort of an interest in this has imagined, and then they're feeding it to you. So just really, and there are a lot of ways that you can, a lot of steps you have to take to make sure that you are, sticking that, the truth is what is emerging in your stories and nothing else. And one tricky area to navigate, I mean, and this is a big difference between travel journalism in the UK and travel journalism in the United States, particularly for the New York Times, is that in the UK and for some publications, it's very common for travel journalists to take freebies, to take sort of free trips or free flights or free hotel stays or a discount on a group tour, this kind of thing. Which is, if you're doing that, and I can, make it possible, like, because publications only have so much in their budget.
Right.
But it's really like, it's really hard for me to imagine that taking those sorts of discounts or freebies or whatever isn't going to have an impact on the story that you write at even a very sort of subconscious level. You're going to feel indebted to these people. So I think that's, the New York Times has a very strict policy, kind of famously has a super strict policy on this, and that, they don't allow people who contribute to the New York Times to take freebies or discounts from anyone, no matter, even if, like, if I'm writing a story for, you know, I don't know, The Guardian or something, and I'm offered a discounted hotel stay. If I take that hotel stay for a story I'm writing for The Guardian, I'm not allowed to write for the New York Times for, I think, 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so that they don't want, so you cannot be compromised, you know? So I have abided by this, and I have been like, so, you know, in my reporting for the book and all of my reporting for the New York Times on people, I do not accept any freebies or discounts. And sometimes there have been some really awkward situations, because it is something that people are kind of used to doing. You know, people who work and travel are used to kind of like, oh, well, just come along, you know, just come along for this trip that we're organizing. And you have to be like, no, 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 like, if I'm going to come, I'm going to pay. And there have been some really awkward moments where, you know, somebody's trying to kind of give me a deal, and I'm just like, no, 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 please, like, I need to pay for this. Like, I need a receipt.
Yeah.
I need to pay. Because I really, you know, I it's so important to me to maintain that you know, strict, like, link to the truth, and not to
Yeah.
feel like I owe anybody a favor.
For sure.
And by doing that, so navigating that line is tricky. But even if you're not taking freebies, you know, there are people out there who are trying to spin things, and every journalist will, you know, encounter this no matter what you're reporting on. And so just, again, doing your homework, speaking to people like 360 degrees around a topic, and saying, oh, to this person, I heard this from that person, what do you think of that? Or in this, you know, and just kind of cross-referencing and triangulating, and doing my best to, you know, and of course, like, look at the figures and look at the data that are sort of backing up what people, or not backing up what people are saying, but really look, you know, take everything with it, you know, approach everything with a super open mind and open heart. And, like, I'm here to learn. I don't have an agenda that I'm trying to drive. I'm here to sort of find out what the truth is, and then write that truth into my story. That's always my approach. And yeah, I do my best, and it's a challenge, but it's one that I really enjoy.
I mean, I really, really wholeheartedly sympathize with that, because, you know, being a historian, and you go through your whole degree, master's, PhD, etc., everybody telling you, you know, you cannot be biased. Everything that you do has to be 100% unbiased, because otherwise you're not representing history, you're representing your opinion on history, and that's not what historians do. But, you know, the reality of events is, there is a difference between representing the truth and having an opinion, I think. And also a difference between the truth and what the facts that are commonly known are. So it is a very thin line to navigate. And I suspect more than once you have had to sort of encounter some people that perhaps were not very receptive with what you had to say. But it is important, you know, particularly I feel in the world of fake news and sensationalist reporting that happens even now in some very, you know, mainstream outlets. It is really important to at least try to have a clear head. I mean, I frankly don't believe any single thing that anyone related in the sort of humanities or social sciences can ever talk about is 100% unbiased, unless you're just looking at raw data and not interpreting the data. Because at the end of the day, we're all human, and we have our own experiences, and they are going to affect us. But you can't take your biases out of the box. And you know, like you said, you just need to expose yourself to all kinds of things, whether you like them or whether you don't. So on that front, and this is not something that is just come to me, so my apologies for bargaining with it. Has there ever been a situation, a story, or something you've actually wanted to cover that has really put you in a situation of, no way, after doing all the research or whatever, you've been like, yeah, this does not sit right with me, like, I can't actually talk about this, or talking about this has been incredibly difficult at all? I don't know if you've ever had that situation.
Interesting. Well, I can say I've had situations where, you know, I think probably every journalist has had this, where you get an assignment from your editor, and the editor has an idea of what the story is in their mind, because, you know, they're sitting in their desk and they're reading the news.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, give us this story, you know, give it this kind of update, talk to this person, that person. And you're like, okay. And then go out and I do the reporting, and I'm like, actually, the reality doesn't match what my editor told me she wants in the story, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's happened multiple times. I mean, sometimes it happens in sort of smaller ways. There's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a nuance that, you know, or, and sometimes it happens in pretty big ways. Like actually, I'd rather not give any sort of specific examples here, just,
Yeah, of course.
but it's my job, again, to go back to my editor and say, like, yeah, listen, I can see how you got that narrative of a story that you have in your head. Well, actually, I can give an example. Like when I was in Sierra Leone, this is a country that, you know, experienced a terrible civil war in the 1990s. But, you know, when I was there in 2010, it had been at peace for almost 10 years. There was really no violence. The like guns had almost disappeared from the streets. It was a very safe, you know, place. And yet, a lot of the editors I was pitching, you know, saw it as this kind of like war-torn Sierra Leone, so like blood diamonds and child soldiers, and this is the only lens through which they could understand this country.
Mm-hmm.
Things that I'm pitching, you know, I'm kind of getting pushed back, like let's fit it into that narrative of the country, you know. So it's my job as a journalist, as a person who's there seeking the truth, you know, and trying to speak the truth, and to make sure that
Yeah.
the story leads with the truth. It doesn't lead with any preconceived mindset from like that I might have had going in, because I always kind of have like a bit of an idea of a story before I write it, but my job is to be as open-minded as possible. Yeah, I think I'm gonna sort of like back down from. I can think of a few other examples, but I'm not comfortable to go into
No,
the. Yeah,
that's
it
fair
can be,
enough.
and you know, and tourism. I mean, this is one thing I explore in the book. Like tourism overlaps with politics
Yeah,
a lot, right?
massively, massively so. But
Yeah,
people don't realize that. They just think it's just
yeah,
whatever, and
yeah.
it's not the case. There are many agendas that are, you know, depending on the country or the region that you may be, or even, you know, specific institutions. I'm talking about museums, monuments, etc.
Oh yeah,
They may have their own agendas, and well, yeah, it's sometimes you need to walk around
yeah.
eggshells,
I mean,
essentially.
yeah. I mean, tourism is like, you know, governments, and yeah, there have been moments where I was kind of thinking about doing a story, but then um, back down. But you know, because like tourism is really, well, I should say that never back down completely, but maybe like
Yes.
shifted shifted approach.
Yeah.
You know, tourism is really one of the primary lens through which we understand other nations and other cultures. And you know, there are a lot of people with a powerful interest in what that lens is, what that narrative is. And so actually, you know, the story that you're telling tourists who visit, you know, your site or your city or your nation are getting an impression, and what impression do you want that to be? And there are a lot of people with a strong interest in shaping that narrative, you know, and it can have a big impact on your global reputation, on you, you know, how you're even kind of, you know, level of soft power on the world stage in ways that are sort of, you know, good, bad, and everything in between. But yeah, the links between tourism and politics I find fascinating, and I do yeah, explore that in the book too, because yeah, I think it's kind of unexpected and something that doesn't occur to a lot of people.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree, and it's also a subject that is difficult to sort of handle, because I mean, my view here comes from interacting with the public. You know, a lot of people that go and engage with tour guides or tourism professionals, whether it's historians, archaeologists, whatever. You don't know what the expectations of those people are. You have no idea what's coming through the door, and sometimes it's also very hard breaking certain stereotypes or sort of trying to open people's minds to other ideas. One that happens to me quite often is I come originally from Spain, and the vast majority of people have this view of Spain and Spanish tourism that was actually a policy that was developed in the 60s during the Spanish dictatorship of Franco. So, you know, most people going to my home country come with this warped idea from the alt-right of what Spain should be, completely missing what Spain is and has become ever since then. And when you need to break those news to them, it just seems to melt their brains sometimes. And that's just like a very obvious example, right? That I can think about. But yes, there are many, and particularly from the, I guess, for someone like me who is doing it from the point of view of education and approaching people to reality, I can get away with a lot of stuff because at the end of the day, history is there to have a proven record. But when you're reporting and providing, a journalistic analysis, it's a little bit different, and the implications for someone like you, I suspect, can be much more complicated in the long term, for sure, than the ordinary citizen or person engaging in these activities. So I get that entirely. But it's good that, like you said, not back down, but sort of reframe it, right? That's the
Yeah, or keep that in mind and make sure that when I'm reporting on a place that I'm triangulating, that I'm understanding that, the point of view that I'm getting from over here, and it doesn't match up. If it doesn't match up with the point of view I'm getting from over here, okay, what are let me find a third person who doesn't have a direct interest, who can kind of triangulate and help me understand why
yes.
things don't match up. Just really, again, like doing my homework and not taking things at face value, not taking, you're not just kind of copying and pasting from a press release or whatever, but doing my homework. But that's really interesting that you mentioned the and under Franco, because in researching my book, I came across the example of flamenco dancing. And jump in here because you know more
Yes.
this than I do, but how this was actually like kind of a very regional dance, and then Franco
Yes.
wanted to present this sort of vision of Spain as a national kind of unity, unified country. And so he helped develop, he was like, flamenco should be the image of Spanish tourism, and kind of push this one dance over the whole of the country, which, he did very effectively, because we still think of like flamenco very intricately like linked to Spanish tourism. But that's a very direct result of a policy that had some very explicit like political motivations, right? Like he wanted to do that because it was in his political interest to have this vision of Spain, in the outside world, and it worked. So, but it sort of it suppressed regional differences within Spain in a way that, from what I understand, tell me if I'm wrong here, that a lot of people in Spain weren't so happy with.
Yeah,
So
I mean, and it still affects us. Like, I come from the north of Spain. Like, I've never danced flamenco in my life. It's not part of my cultural identity. It is very regional. Flamenco is something that really its roots, which, when you think about it as well within the political context, is bonkers, because flamenco is developed and the legacy of the Spanish Roma people, who were actually migrants that the Franquist regime were actually very badly persecuting for a long time for being an ethnic minority. But because it's a very visual thing that has that edge of romanticism, right? The takeover of flamenco is something that already was happening since the 19th century because of its roots, and something that was very specifically local to Spain. It's kind of assumed that that's the only thing. And Spain is a huge country, by the way. We have lots of different landscapes and regions that completely couldn't be related to this culture for whatever reason. And yeah, it's an absolute shock. People just assume, oh, you're Spanish, so flamenco, sunshine, and paella. And that's the same thing with paella. Paella was developed as a touristic kind of dish, so that tourists would consume it mostly in touristic resorts as the typical Spanish dish.
I had
And
no
where I come
idea.
from, you don't eat paella. Even Valencian people, who is where it comes from traditionally, you don't have paella like every day of the week. It's like a very specific thing under very specific circumstances. But that's the image, and it's taken a lot of time to actually move away from that, and it's hard. It's hard fighting a stereotype that has been in place for the best part of now 70 years nearly.
Mm.
So it is one of those. And like I said, that one is just very easy because we have very clear record. But we could say the same of not just many countries, but many different regions, right? And even specific cities or whatever. So it's quite a complicated it's quite a complicated issue for sure. Right, I see that we have literally 10 minutes left, so let me try and for sure. Hang on. Oh, I think it froze there for a second.
Yeah, I think we're back.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
No, that's fine. No worries. Yeah, I think we have like 10 minutes left. So I really wanted to ask you, just from the point of view of purely like tourism and the sort of, I guess, first point of contact that most people have with this kind of world, which is, where are they going to go on holiday or on trip or an adventure or whatever. Do you have like a top 3 places or something like that that really, really surprised you, either for good or bad? Like they left a clear mark on you because it was something that you couldn't have expected, or that really left you thinking, wow, now that I'm here, I really want to pursue this kind of story, or I want to find out more, because it just, it seems something worth knowing about, or worth crediting somehow.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. I have to say, as a travel journalist, I've been to a lot of places where people are kind of fed up with tourism, because in some parts that's what I'm going to report on, like the challenges and how are they navigating the challenges or not. So it's really refreshing and wonderfully surprising when I go to a place and tourism is working really well and they're excited about tourism and they want more tourists, and they're just like really, a lot of people who work in tourism and out of tourism are really excited about it. And so one place that comes to mind is, which again I visited over the summer, and again this is for the book, is the British city of Liverpool, which
Oh, right, yeah.
you're there in the UK. I had never been. I lived in the UK for 2 years, about a decade ago, and never made it up to Liverpool. And I was fascinated by the city. It was beautiful, and there were so many interesting cultural things happening. It felt so alive and so vibrant, and so, yeah, I don't know, kind of had a young sort of vibe to it,
Yeah.
with a lot of really interesting history at the same time. And I was there to kind of find out what was going on with tourism, and I interviewed a bunch of people, as I always do, and I did not hear a single negative word about tourism, which is very rare, let me say. Um, and it's just a place where people are, they have this kind of like, we love outsiders kind of spirit, and just really kind of embracing their own definition of their own sort of vision of the future, which is very different from maybe a typical kind of English city. So Liverpool, I kind of went in because I'd heard that, some stuff was happening. They were like delisted from the UNESCO World Heritage List, but they were kind of, yeah, they were kind of like, you know what, whatever, we don't need UNESCO, we're going to do our own thing, which is kind of what initially piqued my interest in the city. I was like, well, let me go see what's going on there. And I was like, yeah, they're totally defined, they're charting their own path, and tourism is part of it, and it's their own vision, and they're so excited about tourists. So I'm excited to go back to Liverpool. I really enjoyed my time there. I met some incredibly fascinating and friendly people there. So Liverpool is one. The other place that comes to mind, which is another place that surprised me with how positive people, everyone I spoke to, felt about tourism, is actually the south coast of India, the state of Kerala.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you know Kerala? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know a lot of people from there. I know a lot of people working in the tourism industry there.
Yeah.
So I have views from both like locals living and people working in tourism, and it's quite a, yeah, interesting conversation, right?
Yeah, an interesting conversation, and one that I think has really shifted a lot over the last 10 to 15 years. And they went from, kind of in 2008, 2009, having protests against tourism because the locals felt they weren't being included in tourism discussions, and that they were just kind of suffering from litter, and they weren't being employed by the resorts and the kind of things, to the government really listened to the protesters, and they started this whole new kind of like pilot project to develop a different approach to tourism, and the government really got engaged and got behind it, and they have this whole responsible tourism mission in Kerala. And I was there last year, and I hung out with the head of the Responsible Tourism Mission in Kerala for a while, and yeah, they've really figured out a way to make tourism work in a way that really supports communities, and that people in the communities are really excited to share their heritage and their fantastic cuisine and their culture and all their traditions. So it was just, and they were like really just really warm and welcoming, and again excited to have tours. I was in Kerala not long after, I had just a couple of months after I had been in Hawaii for a while, again reporting for the book. And Hawaii, it's just it's a very different vibe there. You know, they've had tourism for a long time. It's become really, really big, and there are a lot of people who are speaking out about it, and because they're unhappy. And I spent a lot of time hanging out with those people when I was in Hawaii. And then to go to Kerala, where everybody's just so gung-ho, I was like, it's fascinating and wonderful to see, and also just a really beautiful, very laid back kind of vibe, delicious food, beautiful landscape. I was like telling my parents as soon as I got back, I was like, if you guys, ever go to India, this is the spot for you. It's so, yeah, those two places were pleasant. Maybe I'll stop at two because I've been going on for a little while, but those two were Liverpool and Paris, were both pleasant surprises that I would love to return to, and would definitely recommend to other people.
Yeah, I mean, I must say I can say the same. I've not physically been on either, but everyone that I speak to, all the research that I've done, and particularly Liverpool, because it's a place that you need to know if you're in the UK. It's a city that just has so much to offer from so many different perspectives. You want history and culture, you have it. You are a Beatles maniac, it's the place to be. You kind of have to be. Do you want to see a typical sort of working class, nearby the sea town with typical British architecture? You have it. And perhaps it's not what most people, want to see, but it is a particular type of architecture and vibe that is important to experience if you really want to understand the UK outside of London. Let's say that. And it is a very surprising place. Plus, from the other perspective, at least from me, when I'm always talking to people, Liverpool is also a great place from where you can connect with so many other areas of the UK. So you can go from Liverpool to Wales very easily, and Wales requires more tourism. So, please go over there. You can connect very easily with Birmingham, Manchester, further up north, the Lake District. So I think it's just one of those places that people just traditionally associate with, oh, it's an ugly industrial town. And it kind of gets lost in that in that lack of romanticism. But yeah, the UNESCO thing was very surprising, and I'm glad that you've experienced their new attempts to actually push it forward, because it was quite shocking, and a complicated situation for some time. So yeah, it's good to see that there is always another way forward. And I think, I don't know, maybe you have a different experience of that, but I suspect the case of Liverpool, just like with Kerala, and potentially where you're staying in France as well, the the, the way that these places really engage with things and make them better, in my opinion, is just by accepting and respectfully sharing the local history and heritage, like what makes them with others, which is, I think, something we need more in general in the world of travel. Local places, they all have a soul and a vibe and a thing that is, worthy of consideration. And they are communities. So I always say tourism is communities, and if we're not doing that, we will have a problem long term, because it's not just communities from the point of view of the structures that support tourism, but the people that live of tourism are are communities, right? So it has to work both ways. Otherwise, well, the people like you will only get to report about how crazy it is in Rome in this day and age, or how many cruise ships are we now sending over to Norway, and things like that, which seems like a shame personally.
Yeah, no, you make a great point, and that was like the structure that they've developed in Kerala to make sure that the communities at a really sort of micro level are leading the discussions, are setting the terms by which tourists experience their communities, I found really fascinating, and I would love to sort of go back and see it in action in more depth. But they really, it's very community led, community focused, just like you said, because that's how I think that's really how you avoid getting into a lot of the problems that can arise with tourism if it's not kind of approached in the right way.
For sure. No, I agree wholeheartedly. And I really look forward to reading the book, Paige. I think it's going to be a very interesting mix of things that are going to really put a very interesting perspective on the world out there. So keep me posted when it becomes available and in Europe, or at least the UK, because it would be awesome to actually be able to, engage with it and use it as a material to tell people, look, it's not just me. There's other people out there looking at the situation from this perspective. And on that note, we have like two minutes left on this thing. I guess what I'm gonna do is, like we always do, I'll give you the floor to any final comments, any final things either about you, your career, or whatever, even if it's just tourism, etc., that you want to say for people watching now or later on at home. Last final remarks. The floor is entirely yours, Paige.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Lillian. Yeah, I just have to say, like, what motivates me these days as a travel journalist is really like what I would love to do, what I hope to do in my work, is to help tourists, help all of us who travel, just kind of like wake up to the stakes of what's involved in the activity that we're doing. And I hope to do that in a really, engaging and welcoming way. Because I think tourism is really important, and I think it's easy for us to dismiss it. I think it's easy for governments to dismiss it. I think it's for business to dismiss the importance of it. I think it's easy for us as tourists to dismiss. And I hope that we might understand that, tourism is an industry, yes. It's also something we do for fun. But at the same time, tourism is a huge social force, and when we travel outside of our homes, like we become a part of this, huge social phenomenon that is, as well as economic, right? But as a huge social phenomenon that is tourism, and we are actors within that like movement of tourism. And are we actors for good or are we actors for bad? I mean, it really depends on the mindset that we have and the level of awareness we have about the impacts of our travels. So I hope that people, when they travel, stay really curious about the place they're visiting and the potential effects that they will have, good, bad, and everything in between, on the place that they're visiting. And I hope that we all will find the courage to open up ourselves, open up our hearts and minds to the place that we're visiting, connect with the people we meet when we travel, stay aware of our impacts, and connect with open hearts and open minds. And that's how we can evolve, use our travels to evolve as individuals in a way that I think will help us as individuals and help our societies too. So yeah, that's maybe my final words.
I think they are very, very fair words. And as usual, I hope people start noticing a trend when we make these talks. Stay curious, people. Like, that's the key to everything that we do here in the world of history, culture, travel, heritage. You need to be curious. If you go to places, or if you engage with the world around you from that regards, in a way that is, sort of box standard and very close-minded, you won't actually explore the world. You will just see things without context and without any kind of true heart. So I really, really love those final words, Paige. I think they're very inspiring. So thank you so much for that.
Oh.
And thank you in general for spending some time here with me today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you. I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, I hope to stay in touch.
Always. And to everyone watching either now or later, thank you so much for being here with us. Hopefully you have some interesting perspective now on what it takes to really engage with travel and tourism from all kinds of different, perspectives. And of course, keep an eye out for Paige's new book, because I think is really going to be absolute top notch. So on that note, thank you so much one more time, and I'll see you sometime soon.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.